Your soulmate just learned you're about to leave. And they panicked. Don't scroll away yet, because the moment they found out you might be leaving, something inside them changed so fast they could barely understand it themselves. 1 minute, they were moving through the day like everything was normal, still telling themselves there was time, still believing they could wait a little longer before saying what they really felt. And then they heard it. Your name. A few words. A simple piece of news that suddenly made the world around them feel completely different. You might be leaving. Maybe for a new opportunity. Maybe for a new chapter. Maybe because something inside you finally decided you could not stay in the same emotional place forever. They did not know every detail, but they knew enough to feel panic rise in their chest. And this is where the story begins, because the panic was not only about losing your presence. It was about realizing how much they had never told you while they still believed you would always be there. Stay with me here, because the next part is important. The person you love had been living under one dangerous assumption: there would always be more time. More time to send the message. More time to explain the silence. More time to admit that every time they acted distant, there was something deeper happening underneath. More time to tell you that your absence affected them more than they ever wanted you to know. But the second they heard you were about to leave, time stopped feeling endless. Suddenly, every unfinished conversation became loud. Every moment they held back returned to them. Every time they typed something and erased it. Every time they almost called. Every time they watched you walk away from a conversation and told themselves, "I'll fix it later." Later had always felt safe. Now later sounded terrifying. They tried to act normal at first. They told themselves not to overreact. Maybe the information was wrong. Maybe you were only thinking about leaving. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe nothing was decided. But their body was already telling the truth their mind was trying to avoid. Their heart was racing. Their thoughts would not slow down. Their attention kept drifting back to one question: what if you really go? And behind that question was another one, even more painful: what if you go thinking they never cared enough to stop you, never cared enough to tell you what was real? That possibility hit them harder than the leaving itself. Because the truth was, you mattered. You had mattered for longer than they admitted. But somewhere between feeling and expression, they had failed to make that clear. They had convinced themselves that you could probably sense it. That you knew. That their small actions were enough. But now, with the possibility of distance suddenly becoming real, they realized how dangerous that assumption had been. Love hidden inside someone's heart does not always feel like love to the person waiting outside it. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Sometimes it feels like rejection. Sometimes it feels like nothing at all. And maybe that is what frightened them most. What if the entire time they thought they were protecting themselves, they were teaching you to believe you were not important? They sat down somewhere quiet and opened your conversation on their phone. They did not send anything yet. They just looked. Your name. Your picture. The history between you. They began scrolling upward, slowly at first, then faster. And something strange happened as they read old messages. They started seeing moments differently. Things you said months ago suddenly carried new meaning. A simple, "Are you okay?" looked like care they had taken for granted. Just let me know if you need space, looked like patience they had not fully appreciated. A message where you tried to continue a conversation after they went distant now looked like effort they had allowed you to carry alone. And the more they read, the heavier their chest became. They realized that you had been showing them, quietly, that you were willing to meet them halfway. And they had kept stopping before the middle. Not because they did not want you. Because wanting you made everything feel too real. That was the part they had never been brave enough to say. The closer you got, the more they felt. The more they felt, the more afraid they became. And every time fear rose, they created distance. They told themselves they needed time to think. They told themselves they were being careful. They told themselves they were avoiding making promises they were not ready for. But if they were completely honest, part of that distance was not wisdom. It was self-protection. They were trying to control how vulnerable they became. And now, for the first time, they saw what that control may have cost. You. Listen carefully to this next part, because this was the moment their panic started becoming something deeper. They remembered the last time you seemed different around them. Maybe quieter. Maybe more reserved. Maybe you stopped asking questions you used to ask. Maybe you stopped reaching out first. At the time, they noticed, but they did not want to confront it. They told themselves you were busy. Maybe tired. Maybe distracted. But now they wondered if that was the beginning of you letting go. What if you had already started preparing yourself to leave before anyone ever mentioned it? Not just physically. Emotionally. What if you had reached the point where waiting for clarity hurt more than stepping away? That thought made them feel sick, because suddenly they understood that leaving might not be some random change in your life. It might be part of a bigger decision to stop living in uncertainty. And if that was true, they could not blame you. That was the hardest part. They could not tell themselves you were being unfair. They could not say you had not given them enough time. You had given them time. Maybe more than they realized. And now they were the ones staring at the consequences of delay. They stood up and started pacing. Their mind kept creating scenarios. You packing your things. You telling people goodbye. You becoming excited about a future that did not include them. You slowly getting used to not speaking as often. Your life filling with new places, new routines, new people. And maybe one day, their name becoming something you remembered instead of something you waited to see on your screen. That image hurt so much that they stopped moving. Because that was when they finally admitted something to themselves they had been trying to avoid. They did not want to become a memory in your life. They wanted a place in it. Not ownership. Not control. A place. They wanted to be someone you called when something good happened. Someone you trusted when something went wrong. Someone whose presence felt natural, not uncertain. And realizing that scared them because wanting a place in someone's life requires doing something to earn that place. It requires showing up. It requires honesty. It requires consistency. All the things they had been afraid to fully offer. If you're following this emotional journey and you want to know what happens when they finally reach out, subscribe and stay close, because the real turning point has not happened yet. The panic is only the beginning. What they do next forces both of you to confront something that has been hidden between you for a long time. They looked at your chat again. This time, instead of scrolling through old messages, they opened the text box. They typed, "Is it true you're leaving?" Then deleted it. Too cold. Too sudden. They tried, "I heard something today and I need to ask you about it." Deleted again. Too vague. They were doing what they always did. trying to find a perfect sentence so they would not have to risk sounding vulnerable. And for the first time, they recognized the pattern while it was happening. Even now, even with the possibility of losing you right in front of them, they were still hiding behind careful wording. That realization made them angry at themselves. Not because they were weak. Because they were tired of fear controlling every meaningful moment. So they stopped editing. They stopped trying to sound unaffected. They typed the truth. I heard you might be leaving, and I'm realizing I don't know how to act normal about that. Their thumb hovered over the send button. That sentence felt almost embarrassingly honest. But maybe honesty had always felt embarrassing because they were not used to it. They took one breath and pressed send. Delivered. Immediately, panic doubled. Now you knew. At least a little. You knew the news affected them. There was no taking it back. They stared at the screen waiting for the typing indicator. Nothing. 10 seconds. 20. A minute. Their minds started spiraling. Maybe you were busy. Maybe you did not know what to say. Maybe you had already decided that conversation was no longer worth having. They almost sent another message. Almost tried to soften the first one. But they stopped. They knew they had to let you respond. That was part of this too. They could not suddenly become honest and then demand immediate reassurance because honesty made them uncomfortable. So they waited. And during that wait, they realized something else. Their panic was not proof that they should ask you to stay. That would be too easy. If you were leaving because of an opportunity, because of growth, because something important was calling you forward, loving you did not mean asking you to sacrifice that because they finally found courage at the last minute. No. If they cared, they had to respect your life too. They had to tell you the truth without turning their feelings into a chain around your ankle. That distinction mattered. I love you, so don't go was not the same as, I love you, and I should have told you before your life started moving forward. One was control. The other was honesty. They were beginning to understand that. And then your typing indicator appeared. Their heart nearly stopped. 3 dots. Gone. Back again. Gone. Finally, your message arrived. Who told you? Not the answer they expected. They typed a name, then added, is it true? Another pause. This time, your answer came quickly. Maybe. Maybe. One word. Somehow worse than yes or no. What does maybe mean? They asked. You replied, it means I have a chance to leave, and I'm seriously thinking about taking it. Their chest tightened. It was real enough. They typed, why didn't you tell me? And the moment they sent it, they knew the question was unfair. You did not owe them every plan, especially when they had spent so long making the connection unclear. Maybe you felt the same. Your reply came, I didn't know if it would matter to you. There it was. The sentence that broke through everything. I didn't know if it would matter to you. They read it again. And again. Their hearts sank because now they could see exactly how their silence had landed. While they were privately feeling everything, you had publicly received almost nothing. Of course you did not know. How could you? They had expected you to understand what they refused to communicate. They immediately wrote, it matters. Then, because those 2 words felt too small, it matters more than I ever made clear. You read it. No response. The person you love stared at the screen and realized they had reached the edge. There was no safe middle anymore. They could retreat and make the same mistake again, or they could finally say the thing they had been carrying. They typed, "I think I made you believe I felt less than I did." They paused. Then continued, "And I don't know if I get to fix that now, but I need you to know it wasn't because I didn't care." Your answer came slowly. Then what was it? They knew exactly what you meant. If not lack of feeling, then why the distance? Why the silence? Why the hesitation? This was the question they had avoided every time you came close to asking it. And now they had no excuse. So they told you. "I got scared." You replied, "Of what?" They took a long time before answering. "Of needing you." Even typing the words made them uncomfortable. Because they had always valued independence. They had always told themselves they could handle everything alone. Needing someone sounded dangerous. But maybe they had been confusing need with dependence. Caring about someone does make you vulnerable. Their absence can affect you. Their opinion can matter. Their love can become meaningful. And that was what scared them. They typed another line, "The more important you became, the more I started imagining what it would feel like if you left. So I pulled back before that could happen." Your typing indicator appeared immediately. "And now I might actually leave." The irony was brutal. Their strategy had been designed to protect them from losing you, and it may have helped create the exact distance they feared. They replied, "I know." Then, "That's why I'm panicking." You did not answer right away. And they realized that perhaps this was the first time they had used the word openly. Panicking. No pretending. No coolness. No hiding. They were scared to lose you. That was the truth. But again, they reminded themselves that fear did not give them the right to control your choice. So they added, "I'm not asking you to give up something important because I'm scared. I just don't want you to leave thinking you meant nothing to me." Your response came after a long pause, "That's what I thought." Their eyes closed. "What did you think?" they asked, even though they already knew. "That I mattered less to you than you mattered to me." That sentence hurt in a way nothing else had. Because inside them, the reality had been almost the opposite. You mattered so much that they had become afraid. But feelings that are never expressed cannot correct someone else's interpretation. They typed, "You didn't matter less." Then another sentence. "You mattered enough to scare me." You replied, "That doesn't make it easier." And they knew you were right. Fear might explain the behavior, but it did not erase its effect. The person you love stopped trying to defend themselves. Instead, they wrote, "I know. And I'm sorry." Simple. No excuse afterward. No, but. Just accountability. That moment changed the conversation. Because perhaps you had been expecting another explanation. Another reason you were supposed to understand. Instead, they gave you room to be hurt. You wrote, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this now." They answered, "You don't have to do anything. I just needed to finally be honest." And this was new for them too. Not using honesty as a way to force an outcome. They were telling you because you deserved the truth, not because you owed them a particular response. That is where their panic began turning into courage. Not because fear disappeared. Because they stopped letting fear dictate every sentence. You asked, "What are you actually trying to tell me?" And there it was. The final door. You were giving them one clear opportunity to name the feeling. No guessing. No hiding. They stared at the question for almost a full minute. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then they typed, "I love you." They did not send it immediately. They looked at the words. 3 simple words carrying months of hesitation. They remembered every moment they nearly said them. Every time they told themselves it was too soon. Too risky. Too complicated. Now there they were. And for the first time, they understood something. Saying the words did not guarantee anything. It did not make you stay. It did not erase past confusion. It did not repair every hurt. It simply made reality visible. And maybe that was enough for one moment. They pressed send. Silence. Long silence. They could feel their heartbeat in their hands. Then your reply appeared. Why now? Not, "I love you too." Not rejection either. A question. Why now? They answered honestly. Because hearing you might leave made me realize I was waiting for a perfect moment that was never coming. Then another line. And because you deserved to know before you made your next decision. You read it. Your typing indicator appeared. The person you love expected anything. Anger. Relief. Sadness. Maybe goodbye. But what you wrote surprised them. I needed to hear that months ago. They closed their eyes. There was no arguing with that. I know, they replied. You wrote, and part of me still cares about you more than I want to admit. Their breath caught. Hope. But then another message came. That doesn't mean I'm staying. And suddenly, they understood the true challenge. This was not some story where confession automatically stopped your departure. You had a life. A decision. An opportunity. Feelings were part of the situation, not the whole situation. They replied, I understand. And for once, they meant it. You asked, do you? They wrote, I think loving you means I have to. That sentence changed something between you. Because it showed that perhaps they were finally learning a different kind of love. Love that tells the truth but does not demand sacrifice. Love that can say, I want you close, while still respecting the direction your life might need to take. Love that is brave enough to risk distance instead of trying to control it. The conversation continued. You told them the opportunity was real. That it could change your career, your routine, maybe your entire future. You told them you had almost turned it down because leaving felt complicated, but then you realized you could not keep putting your life on hold for a connection that had never been clearly defined. That sentence hurt them, but again, they understood. Their silence had consequences beyond emotion. It had affected how much room you felt you could give this connection in your life. They typed, you shouldn't turn it down because of me. Your answer came quickly. I wasn't going to. Oddly, that made them smile through the fear. Because there you were. Choosing yourself. And maybe that was part of what they loved about you. You could care deeply without abandoning your own future. They wrote, good. You replied, you mean that? They stared at the question. Then answered, I'm terrified. But yes. Honesty again. I don't want the first real thing I do for this connection to be asking you to make yourself smaller for me. That sentence touched you. They could tell because your next reply softened. That's the first thing you've said tonight that makes me believe something might really be different. They read it slowly. Something might be different. Not everything was fixed. But something had shifted. They were not only confessing. They were showing you how they wanted to love differently. And then you asked a question they had not expected: if I go, what happens to us? The person you love stared at those words for a long time. Months ago, they would have avoided the question because they did not know the answer. Tonight, they realized not knowing did not mean saying nothing. So they replied, I don't know exactly. Then, before fear could make them delete it, but I know I don't want to disappear from your life just because distance scares me. You answered, I don't want another version of this where you get close for a week and then pull away. There it was. The boundary. The real test. Would panic create one night of courage, only for the old pattern to return once the crisis passed? They knew words could not prove the answer. Only time could. So they wrote, then don't believe me because I'm panicking tonight. Watch what I do after tonight. That was the most honest promise they could make. Not forever. Not perfection. Behavior. You replied, I can do that. And for the first time since hearing. The person you love did remember that night. Not at first. When you sent the message saying, you probably don't even remember it. But I do, they stared at the screen trying to search their memory. There had been so many conversations between you, so many moments that felt important in one way or another, but one specific night? One moment powerful enough to influence your decision to leave? They could not place it immediately. And that alone made them uneasy. Because if something had affected you deeply enough to change the direction of your life, how could they have missed it? Stay with me here, because this is where the story becomes even more emotional. They typed, tell me. 2 words. No excuses. No guessing. Just tell me. And your reply came slowly. It was the night I finally tried to tell you how much this connection was affecting me. Their chest tightened before they even finished reading. Suddenly, something began returning. A late conversation. A moment when you had been more vulnerable than usual. A moment when your words were softer, more careful, but also more honest. They remembered you saying something like, sometimes I don't know where I stand with you. They remembered seeing the message. They remembered feeling panic. And then they remembered what they did next. Instead of answering directly, they changed the subject. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. They said something casual. Something safe. Something that allowed them to escape the emotional weight of the moment. At the time, they told themselves they were avoiding making things complicated. But now they could see what that moment may have felt like from your side. You had stepped forward. They had stepped sideways. You had opened a door. They had pretended not to notice it. And in the silence that followed, you made a decision they knew nothing about. You told yourself, I cannot keep building my future around someone who won't even tell me if I belong in theirs. That sentence had stayed inside you. Maybe you never sent it. Maybe you never said it aloud. But it became a turning point. Not because you stopped loving them that night. Because you realized loving someone and waiting for them are not always the same thing. You could care and still move forward. You could hope and still choose your own life. You could feel deeply and still decide that uncertainty was not enough to build around. The person you love read your message and felt something break open inside them. They typed, "I remember now." Then, after a pause, "I'm sorry." You replied, "That night changed something for me." They stared at those words. "How?" they asked, even though part of them already knew. You answered, "I realized I kept giving you chances to be honest, and every time the conversation got real, you found a way to disappear without actually leaving." That sentence hit harder than anger would have. Disappear without leaving. It described the exact pattern. They remained present enough to keep the connection alive, but distant enough to avoid vulnerability. They were there, but not fully. Close, but not reachable. Interested, but not clear. And you had lived inside that contradiction for too long. The person you love typed, "You're right." No defense. No explanation yet. Just recognition. And maybe that was the first time you felt that they truly understood what the pattern had done to you. They continued, "I thought avoiding the conversation would keep me from saying something I wasn't ready to stand behind. I didn't realize that saying nothing was still saying something to you." You read the message. Then replied, "It said I wasn't important enough for honesty." Their eyes closed. That one hurt. Because inside them, the truth had been the complete opposite. You had mattered enough to scare them. But fear expressed as distance can look exactly like indifference from the outside. They typed, "I hate that I made you feel that way." You answered, "I don't think you meant to." Then another message followed. "But I also stopped letting intention erase impact." That sentence stayed with them. Intention and impact. Two different things. They may never have wanted to hurt you. But they did. They may never have wanted to make you doubt yourself. But you did. They may never have wanted to push you toward leaving. But their behavior became part of the reason you were willing to go. And suddenly, they understood that apologies were not about proving they were a good person. Apologies were about acknowledging the experience they created for someone else. So they wrote, "You're right. I can't ask you to feel differently just because I didn't mean it." That mattered. Because you had spent enough time explaining their behavior for them. You did not need another reason to understand. You needed them to understand you. And for once, they were trying. You told them what happened after that night. You went home feeling embarrassed for opening up. You replayed your own words, wondering if you had been too vulnerable. You questioned whether you misread everything. You considered sending another message to clarify, then stopped yourself because some part of you knew you were about to chase an answer from someone who already had an opportunity to give one. So you did something different. You opened your email. You looked again at an opportunity you had been considering for weeks. Maybe work. Maybe study. Maybe a move. Maybe a project that would take you somewhere new. You had been hesitating because part of you wanted to stay close to the person you loved. But after that conversation, you asked yourself a hard question. Why am I making decisions around someone who has never asked me to stay? That question changed everything. You accepted the opportunity soon after. Not out of revenge. Not to punish them. Not because your feelings disappeared. You accepted because you realized your life could not remain paused around someone else's fear. And now, hearing that, the person you love finally understood the timeline. Your leaving did not come out of nowhere. It had grown quietly from one emotional moment they barely remembered. That realization filled them with regret. But regret alone would not help. They knew that. So instead of asking you to reconsider, they asked a different question. Are you happy you said yes to the opportunity? You paused. Then replied, I think so. They asked, even if it means leaving? You answered, yes. I'm scared too. But I think I need it. And something inside them settled. Because if they loved you, they had to respect that answer. They could wish the timing were different. Wish they had spoken sooner. Wish they could rewind months and handle that night differently. But they could not turn their regret into your responsibility. So they wrote, then I want you to go. You stared at that message. What? They saw you type. They continued quickly, I don't mean I want you gone. I mean I want you to take the opportunity if it matters to you. I don't want you staying because I finally got scared enough to tell you the truth. That was one of the hardest things they had ever written. Because everything inside them wanted you close. But love was forcing them to separate desire from control. They wanted you. They did not own your future. You replied, I didn't expect you to say that. They answered, neither did I. And maybe that was another sign something was changing. Their old fear would have tried to secure you. Their new honesty was trying to respect you. But do not think this suddenly made the pain disappear. It did not. The person you love still felt terrified. Every time they imagined the day you would leave, their chest tightened. Every time they pictured your life becoming busier, fuller, farther away, they felt the old urge to panic. But now they were learning to sit with the fear without letting it make the decision. That was new. That mattered. You asked, so what do you want from me? Another difficult question. Months ago, they might have answered vaguely. I don't know. Let's see. Whatever happens, happens. Tonight, they knew that kind of answer would only recreate the same uncertainty. So they thought carefully. Then wrote, I want a chance to show you that what I said tonight isn't just panic. They paused. But I don't want that chance if giving it to me means you have to stop living your life. You read that slowly. Then asked, what would a chance look like? They thought about it. Not dramatic promises. Not constant messages. Not some intense relationship built overnight because distance was coming. They wrote, consistency. Honesty. A real conversation when something feels wrong instead of disappearing. And letting both of us decide what this becomes without forcing it. You replied, that sounds simple. They smiled slightly. It probably should have been simple the whole time. That sentence contained regret, but also hope. Maybe love had become complicated because both of you were trying to protect yourselves from being the first one to admit how much it mattered. Now the protection had become heavier than the truth. You continued talking. You asked about the night they first realized they cared about you. That question surprised them. They had assumed the answer would be some obvious romantic moment. But after thinking, they told you it was something much smaller. A day when they were upset and tried to hide it. You noticed. You did not force them to talk. You simply stayed present. Later, they realized they felt calmer because you were there. That was the first time your presence became emotional safety instead of simple attraction. They had never told you that. You replied, I remember that day. They asked, did you know? You said, I knew something changed. I just didn't know what. That answer made them wonder how many moments both of you had felt the same shift and then stayed silent. So much hidden between two people. So much communication happening through glances, pauses, subtle changes in tone. And yet, none of it could replace language forever. That was the lesson repeating again and again. Feelings can begin in silence, but relationships cannot survive there indefinitely. If you're enjoying this continuation, subscribe and stay close, because the next part of this story reveals what happens when the person you love realizes your departure date is much closer than they thought. The confession happened. The truth is out. But now time itself becomes the next test. You finally told them when you were leaving. Not months from now. Not some distant future. Soon. Much sooner than they expected. They looked at the date and felt panic return like a wave. There were only a few days. A handful of days to see you, talk properly, say the things both of you had postponed for so long. Their first instinct was to try to fill every remaining moment. Meet every day. Talk constantly. Make up for lost time with intensity. But then they caught themselves. That would be another form of panic. Another attempt to control the situation. You did not need a dramatic countdown. You needed sincerity. So they asked, "Can I see you before you go?" Your answer took time. Maybe. That word again. But this time, they did not interpret it as rejection. You were deciding. You had every right. They replied, "No pressure. I just want to talk face to face if you're comfortable." You wrote back, "I think I want that too." And suddenly, there was a meeting ahead. Not a perfect romantic reunion. A conversation. A real one. Both of you carrying months of feelings, misunderstandings, hope, boundaries, and a departure date hanging over everything. The person you loved barely slept that night. Not because they were rehearsing some huge speech. They were trying to understand what they wanted to say without turning the meeting into a performance. They knew "I love you" was already out. They knew you cared. The next conversation needed to be about something deeper: what love would actually look like after you left. Could they handle distance? Could you trust them enough to try? Would old patterns return once physical distance made communication even harder? What if one of you changed? What if the opportunity extended? What if the connection was not meant to survive this transition? These questions scared them. But for the first time, they did not see fear as a reason not to have the conversation. Fear was exactly why the conversation mattered. The next day, they messaged you in the morning. Something simple: "I meant what I said last night. I hope today is good to you." No emotional demand. No "Did you change your mind?" No need for reassurance. You replied a little later, "Thank you. I hope yours is too." Small. Ordinary. But consistency begins in ordinary moments. They messaged when they said they would. They did not disappear after vulnerability. They did not pretend the conversation never happened because daylight made everything feel more exposed. And you noticed. You did not say it immediately, but you noticed. Later that afternoon, you asked, "Are you okay?" They answered honestly. "Not really. I'm scared about you leaving, but I'm trying not to make that your problem." You read it and replied, "You can tell me you're scared. That doesn't make it my responsibility to fix it." The person you love stared at that sentence. This was what healthy closeness looked like. Sharing emotion without handing someone else the job of removing it. They replied, "I'm learning that." You answered, "Me too." And suddenly, the connection felt different. Not because all wounds were healed. Because both of you were finally speaking from where you actually were instead of where you thought you were supposed to be. The day of your meeting arrived. The person you love got there early. Of course they did. They were nervous. They checked the time too often. They thought about leaving twice because waiting made their anxiety worse. But then you appeared. And for 1 second, everything they had planned to say disappeared. You looked familiar and different at the same time. Familiar because you were you. Different because now there was truth between you. No more pretending the feelings were uncertain. No more wondering whether the connection existed only in one person's imagination. You sat across from each other, and the first few minutes were awkward. Small talk. How are you? How was your day? Both of you almost laughed because pretending this was an ordinary meeting felt ridiculous. Finally, you said, "So." One word. They smiled nervously. So. Then silence. And eventually, the person you love said, "I'm sorry about that night." You knew exactly which night. "I know," you replied. They continued. "I've thought about what you said. I don't want to make this meeting about asking you to forgive me quickly. I just want you to know I understand why that moment changed something for you." You watched them carefully. "What do you think it changed?" They answered, "I think it made you stop trusting that I would ever choose clarity." That was accurate. You nodded. "Yeah." They continued, "And I think you started choosing yourself because you couldn't keep waiting for me to do it." You looked down for a second. Maybe because hearing it said aloud made everything more emotional than you expected. "I had to," you said. "I know." No defensiveness. No guilt trip. Just understanding. Then came the harder part. They told you they loved you again, face to face this time. The words felt different outside a phone screen. More vulnerable. More real. But they also told you something else. "I don't know if love is enough to make this work." You looked surprised. Maybe you expected them to use love as the answer to everything. Instead, they were admitting reality. Distance would be hard. Trust had been damaged. Timing was complicated. Feelings mattered, but so did behavior. You replied, "I don't know either." And strangely, both of you relaxed a little. Because uncertainty spoken honestly is less frightening than certainty performed falsely. The person you love said, "I think I'd rather try honestly and find out than spend years wondering what would have happened if I stopped being afraid." You asked, "And if it doesn't work?" They answered, "Then at least we'll know it didn't fail because I never told you the truth." That sentence stayed between you. You looked at them for a long time. Then asked the question they had been dreading. "What if I change when I leave?" They took a breath. "You probably will." That answer surprised you. They continued, "And I probably will too. I don't want you promising to stay exactly the same for me. I just want us to be honest if something changes." There it was. Love without possession. Hope without pretending change would stop. You smiled slightly. "You really have been thinking." They laughed. Panicking first. Thinking second. And for the first time in days, both of you laughed together. A real laugh. It did not solve anything, but it reminded you why the connection mattered. There was warmth here. Ease beneath the fear. Something worth understanding. You talked for a long time after that. About expectations. How often you would communicate. What would make distance feel manageable. What boundaries you needed. You told them you could not handle disappearing acts anymore. They agreed. They told you if they felt overwhelmed, they would say so instead of going silent. You told them you needed freedom to experience the opportunity fully without feeling guilty for enjoying it. They agreed. They admitted jealousy might happen. You admitted yours might too. Neither person promised to never feel difficult emotions. You promised to talk about them before letting assumptions turn them into stories. It was not a fairy tale conversation. It was better. It was two imperfect people trying to build something honest. But then, near the end, you said something that changed their expression completely. There's one thing I'm still afraid of. They asked what? You hesitated. I'm afraid you only want this because I'm leaving. That question had been underneath everything. Was this love finally emerging because distance created urgency? If you suddenly decided to stay, would the courage disappear? Would they become comfortable again and return to old habits? The person you loved did not answer quickly. They respected the question too much for an immediate reassurance. Finally, they said, I think hearing you were leaving forced me to face what was already there. But I understand why you don't trust that yet. You asked, so how do I know? Their answer was simple. You don't. Not today. That honesty surprised you. I have to show you. And perhaps that was the most important sentence of the entire meeting. Because love after confusion cannot be repaired by increasingly beautiful words. At some point, words have to become patterns. Presence. Consistency. Follow through. You nodded slowly. Okay. Not forgiveness of everything. Not a promise. Permission to see what happened next. Eventually, it was time to leave. The person you loved did not want the meeting to end because every ending now reminded them of your departure. But they did not create a dramatic goodbye. They walked with you for a while. Both of you quieter now. At one point, you stopped. They stopped too. There was a moment where neither knew whether to hug. Then you stepped closer. They held you carefully, almost as if they understood that affection was not ownership. The hug lasted longer than either expected. And in that moment, the person you love felt two things at once. Gratitude that you were still here, and grief that soon you would not be physically close. When you stepped back, they said, I'm proud of you. You looked confused. For leaving? They smiled sadly. For choosing something important even when it scared you.